All right, and the last thing I want to say is a huge thank you. A thank you to Irene for planning this afternoon's session. Thank you to everyone who was here this morning and is back or has joined us this afternoon. Um, this is clearly a topic that is on people's hearts and minds right now. It's a heavily subscribed to workshop today, and as a yearly meeting, we're creating this container to be able to both gather us for worship, for learning, as we're going to do today, and also to release these gifts that people bring to us from their work and their witness in the world and spirit. So, thank you, Irene, for leading us this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Melinda, for the introduction there. I'm going to use a PowerPoint deck for this presentation. And when I finish, I'll be sending it over to Kamani so she can distribute it to all of you. And on that PowerPoint deck is my email as well, if you have further thoughts later on. During the course of this presentation, I'm going to pause at least a handful of times with a question. And it'll give you an opportunity to provide some feedback, insight on what you're experiencing in your meeting. And then there'll be further opportunity for questions or comments at the end. As you listen to this material, I'd like you to think about why you attended today. If there is something you think your meeting could do better, or you don't think your meeting knows how to do it, keep that in the forefront of your mind. And if we don't cover that base, we want to be sure to talk about it before the end of this program. So I'll go into my presentation here. Let me minimize okay. All right. So this is about resources, the resources we need to grow our meetings. The thesis behind this presentation is that that PYM, the greater PYM, which is all the meetings and the quarters and our home office, ought to think about modeling ourselves after other thriving organizations from the standpoint of attracting and retaining constituents. And in successful for thriving organizations, whether it be a college, whether it be a trade organization, all kinds of examples out there, there is a centralized resource dedicated to development, member development. And that's what's being proposed here for your consideration, for your input, that sort of thing. So I'm going to go to the beginning, thinking about what's the song from The Sound of Music. We're going to start at the very beginning. A couple of years ago, I came across a study organized by the Harvard Seminary under the auspices of the Cooperative Congregational Studies Partnership. It was a study of religious congregations because of the concern about shrinkage. And there have been other studies since. I think recently there was one by the Pew Foundation. This one was very comprehensive, and I'm going to reveal to you a couple of the conclusions. At the beginning of the study is the comment that churches are one of the most pervasive voluntary organizations in the United States. Think about that. One of the most pervasive voluntary organizations. So churches we know they play a big role, although a declining role, but they're everywhere. In this survey, there were 800 participating congregations, almost all some type of Christian denomination. And the studies evaluated what happened and why it happened relative to attendance at these churches in the period 2000 to 2005. One of the statistics of the many that are in this study, and if anybody is interested in it, I have it digitally and can send it to you. But they blocked out congregations into mainline Protestant, evangelical Protestant, Catholic and Orthodox, other Christian. I think if we were big enough to be counted, we'd be in there, possibly. And then some non-Christian denominations. They picked up some synagogues and some Muslim organizations. So none of these groups were more than 50% of the congregations growing. That's the first point. And second, the more traditional congregations, like the Catholic, like the mainline Protestant, only 20% or so of their congregations were growing during this period. That's how you read this graph. So it gives you an idea of where that growth has been occurring, some has been occurring, and where not. So this is the graph that I was talking about. Percent of congregations growing, and again, not even 50% in any of these groups, but some very definitive shrinkage in some of the long-standing, more traditional denominations. So Methodist, Episcopal, Presbyterian, only 20%, 21% of those congregations were growing. Whereas evangelicals, 40% were growing, that sort of thing. Catholic, 21%. So in the study itself, let me put the slideshow on. They had a lot of questions about the way that these organizations functioned and what they did and what their characteristics were. They found that if you're liberal, it meant you were growing, or if you're conservative, it meant you were growing. That wasn't the case. Actually, there was growth in both ends of the spectrum. It's the centrist or denominations that weren't growing. Those that were growing had a significant portion of men in their active congregations. At least 40% of their congregants were 35 or younger. And they were evident in both suburban or urban locations predominantly. The rural areas were not growing as a rule. One of the characteristics of the folks in these congregations is that there is a very clear articulation of the mission. People were motivated by the mission. Worship was perceived to be joyful and inspired. Very intentional and ongoing involvement of youth in the worship itself. They had an action plan, and many were involved. It didn't just happen. There were multiple methods for visitor follow-up. It wasn't one person who had that job. It was many different aspects or groups in the community. They often had support groups for members and non-members, in other words, to folks outside the church community. And they maintained a website. How about that? Even back in 2000, that was a very important element of the equation. So around that time, that was in the spring of 2020, I sit on the Camp Swatara Planning Committee, which is for the Calne Quarter. It's been going on for decades. It's a weekend in May, the first weekend in May, or intergenerational weekend at a beautiful cabin camping area up in Bethel, Pennsylvania. And we couldn't go on site. COVID prevented us from doing that. So we scratched our heads and said, okay, let's see if we can reimagine this experience. And we decided to have a hybrid program. We always had a theme, and the theme that I lobbied for and I got the support of the group was growing our meetings. There's plenty of interest in that, we thought. So we did that in the first Saturday of May, but it wasn't enough. The audience, I will tell you that we had over 100 registrants, well beyond our quarter. We had plenty from Philadelphia yearly meeting, and also some folks sprinkled from other yearly meetings, Baltimore, New England, and New York. It was clear at the end of that day that we shouldn't stop, so we didn't. There was a hunger for guidance and outreach and new attender integration. So we dove in and we created 6 sessions over the course of the next 10 months or 12 months, and then had a finale. So 8 sessions altogether. We lined up 24 speakers and other kinds of support. And there was never less than 40 people at a session. Our biggest session was the initial session, but we had a couple of others where there were about upwards of 60 or 70 people. This was all on Zoom. So our goal was to identify best practices and also what's the barrier to success? What prevents a meeting from growing? What's blocking it? So we wanted to help meetings identify effective membership development strategies, and I'm using the term membership development to embrace both outreach and new attender integration. So we encouraged the speakers to come up with practical ideas, which they had aplenty. We had lots of conversation in these programs. We documented everything. The whole set of PowerPoints is available, and we created connections between friends. These were the topics. Digital presence. Melinda did her fabulous program on welcoming families and youth. Friendly faces from PYM about all the, I'll call it, dumb things that Quakers do to turn people off just by not thinking. We had 3 meetings who are growing, and we had a panel interview with them to find out what they were doing. We had a training program, Linda mentioned this morning, on Facebook for Friends, led by Emily Provence. And then we capped it off by some topics about meeting vitality. We learned a lot on many fronts, and the most important message was there's no magic pill. There's not one thing you can do to grow your meeting. And you probably all know that, but it was good to be reminded. Along the way, we realized or honed in on the fact that the profile of a meeting that wants to grow is not the same. There are small, very small meetings that are recharging, trying to bring their meetings back to life. There are good-sized meetings that are out there, but they're shrinking. And so this topic appealed to them because they were going through a period of self-examination. And then there are well-oiled meetings with well-oiled outreach, evolving meetings. They have long-standing outreach and newcomer integration program. In our series within PYM, we invited a Newtown meeting, which fits that category. Lancaster meeting fits that category. And another example, most recently that I came to understand better, is Birmingham meeting in Westchester. So they exist. Growing meetings exist. There's just not a whole lot of them out there. So it raises the question, what do meetings need to grow and sustain? What do they need? And who can help them? And will the help be there when they're ready? The level of readiness varies, and you might be ready for one aspect, but not ready for everything. Who can do everything at once? So the readiness also has to do with the energy level in the meeting. It has to do with what their priorities are. It has to do with money. So what do meetings need? Who can help them, and will the help be there when they're ready? And I think that readiness factor is something to keep in mind, because what it suggests or what it indicates is you can't have a touch and go or every once in a while resource. It needs to be there all the time. So I was thinking after the series, well, what would it look like if membership development had a different, I'll call it a higher priority for Philadelphia yearly meeting? And I want to emphasize this is a proposal. Nobody has approved this. Nobody has funded this. It's a proposal. And maybe you'll have some ideas about this proposal. I also want to emphasize that there certainly is work done on outreach and in PYM, for example, and on new member integration. I went to one of the best threads I went to several years ago was organized by PYM on outreach. There is a spiritual formation function within PYM to help meetings or individuals within meetings with spiritual enrichment. And there are lots of resources on religious ed for our youth. Those are 3 very strong examples within PYM. So you'll see me shorthand use the little term MDO, Membership Development Office, whatever that means. It's just shorthand for this function that is being envisioned. So I've organized these ideas around 5 themes. One is, why do people go to church? How do we become a better Quaker? How do we become a Quaker, period, if we're new? What's our public presence and how do we think about that in the larger community? What about greeting and integrating? How do we do that effectively? And what do we need to invest to make this work? So let's talk about why church. Think about the routine activities that shape the life of your meeting. What are the ongoing pieces of your meeting besides meeting for worship? Not the same at every meeting, but there's plenty of overlap. But think about that. And then think about that in the context of the people that are participating and who's not. Who's missing? Is your meeting missing something that they need? And so they only come to meeting for worship, or maybe they don't come at all because they're looking for something that you just don't have. So one way that I conceptualized that question was to think about meeting in terms of a categories of people's needs. Within a meeting, there are what I informally think of as the bedrock Quakers. You probably think about it in similar terms. And they're there for different reasons. Some are very focused on spiritual enrichment. Meeting for worship is not enough. They're going to Bible study, they're going to meditation group, maybe they participated in the spiritual formation program at PYM. That's a high priority for them. Others are very focused on social justice, and I know of many people in our meeting that came to our meeting because of social justice issues that Quakers were strong in. There are some people in the baby boomer generation who came into our meeting as a result of the Vietnam War, for example. Our work on climate change has attracted people. There is some very good work done by the Friends Committee, the National FCNL, I always get those letters mixed up, We have one fellow in our meeting who has been deeply enmeshed in that. But this is a place to, a home base for you for social justice, if that's what you want to focus on. Some people are in meeting or especially enjoy the social bonds, and they're the first ones to sign up for the potluck or to organize it. There are some people in meeting that are very comfortable with keeping the place running, taking care of the building, taking care of the insurance. That's their forte. That, they're fine doing that, and that's where they get their satisfaction. And there are always usually a core of people that are involved in the youth religious ed. So, I mean, there are others as well, but these are some of the routine needs of people, and everyone doesn't have the same needs or the same interests. And it's important to think about that when you consider what your meeting could be doing. And I pose this not just for good sized meetings, but for meetings that are growing and that are, as you grow, as you aspire to a larger congregation, to remember that you're going to have a confluence of people with all different kinds of needs. Outside of that group, I made up the term Quaker citizens. These folks clearly feel that they belong to a meeting, but they don't attend all the time. Could be a young family that's struggling just to not collapse in exhaustion every Sunday from running around all week. It could be some friends who are ill and they can't physically come to meeting, either permanently or for a period of time. Or it could be some who have drifted away from Sunday morning and even involvement in committee work because they're taking care of a sick family member or a handicapped family member. So they're on the perimeter. They're connected, but they're not there all the time, and they have different needs. And finally, the group that I call Friends in Spirit, they identify as Quakers, hardly ever come to meeting for worship. They come for events. They come occasionally for meeting for worship. They probably give some money, or not. This would include teenagers who have gone off to college, or people who have relocated to a place where there is no meeting, or maybe it's far enough away that they can't physically get here. So this model or this framework helped me to think about all the different needs that these friends have. So for example, if you're primarily focused in, or your main focus is spiritual enrichment, you're going to be looking for something like Friendly Bible Study or a meditation group or Power of Eight, something like that. If you have children or you have an interest in child development, there's curriculum available, plenty of that information at PYM. But beyond that, you're looking for help in engaging young people and attracting young people into the meeting. People involved in social justice initiatives, they need some moral support, they need encouragement, and they need us to help promote the initiatives. If you're a young family, you probably would be appealing for you to have some kind of a parent group where you could meet other young families on a social basis. And when meeting has business meeting or events, you're looking for childcare. And a lot of meetings don't think about that. If you're a college student, now you're not going to meeting anymore, at least you're a home meeting, but you appreciate the connections. And that might be a card, it might be somebody on the pastoral care connecting with you once in a while. How you doing? Tell us what you're up to. And also another thing that a lot of meetings don't think about is meetings are laden with people that are in their careers. And how many of these college students know what everybody does in their career? And could they benefit from some exploratory discussions about that? Caregivers certainly need a support group because it's such an isolating, you're so isolated in that function. So what would this membership development office do in that regard? Well, what if we were to inventory all the different routine activities that meetings do? How many meetings have a caregiver support group, and how do they organize that? How many meetings have friendly Bible study? How many, what are meetings doing for their college students? All these different needs are not necessarily met by all meetings, and they're not all doing it the same way. But what if we were to inventory that and then start to circulate that so we could um, it could cross-fertilize each other in that way, not just with ideas, but now that we've all kind of gotten used to Zoom, there's a lot more that's done on Zoom than used to be. Our meeting has had a long-standing friendly Bible study program. With Zoom, with COVID, we threw it over into Zoom, and lo and behold, it works pretty good. And we now have regular attenders from 2 other meetings who didn't have a Bible study. I mean, we can share. So you might have an activity that another meeting doesn't, and you, with the help of Zoom, you may not have the resources or the people power or enough critical mass to do it, but you could invite, or another meeting could invite you in to that particular activity at their meeting. There's so much that can be done here with this networking. So my second theme here is how do you become a Quaker? How does a new attender learn? Osmosis does not work. And I think a lot of meetings assume that it's going to work that way. You're just going to hang around enough, and you kind of start to figure it out. Not a very good education campaign. And how do existing friends fill in the gaps? Maybe they are very much tuned into some of the principles of Quakerism, but they could use some more insight into some of the history, or into ways for spiritual enrichment. As one Quaker told me at a meeting I attended, another meeting I attended, their adult forum one time, she said their adult forum is a way to become a better Quaker. And this is a very important point to think about and to consider, because we're not, there are a lot of aspects of Quakerism that you don't find in other religions. It's different. We don't have any dogma. And oh, by the way, we encourage people to seek and question and go down a path of continuing revelation. What's that all about? What are you supposed to do with that? And what does that mean? We don't have a minister. Most people in our meeting and in many other meetings are convinced Quakers, and they come from a place where there's a minister. And they walk into our meeting house, and where's the pastor? Where's the sermon? So, of course, that stems from the Quaker, unprogrammed Quaker premise of not needing an intermediary, and you have to figure out how that works. We have a deeply rooted belief in the light of God in everyone, and it's so different from the traditional Christian denominations, which are centered on an element of sin and salvation. We don't have that. How does that work for somebody who's coming from another place? What does that mean? And I always say that the light of God and all, you got to remember it's in you too, and that then puts a lot of responsibility on you to think about what does that mean if you have the light of God in you. That should change your behavior as well. Finally, Quakers have a very distinct process for conducting their business. This whole concept of a sense of a meeting or having disagreement but focusing on unity, not everyone agreeing but on unity, that's a singular or a distinct Quaker uh, process, and it's something to be learned and absorbed. So these are all dimensions of our faith that require some kind of education, whether it's through adult forums, whether it's through Quaker speak, whether it's through recommended readings or spiritual book clubs. Needs to be intentional, otherwise newcomers start to fall away because they don't know what's going on. So what would this membership development office do in that regard? Well, we all need some help in talking about our faith to newcomers, and we all and there is a range of adult education methods. What if this office were to sponsor an annual thread on those very topics to help us with that? And what if a lot of us have speakers from time to time in our adult programs? What if we were to create a centralized place to publicize that, so that Quakers from other meetings, friends from other meetings, could hear them or get a copy of the transcript? The third concept is our public presence, which many people talked about this morning, and it boils down to whether do our neighbors know that there are Quakers in the area? What do they know about local Quakers? How do they know that? Well, okay, so we have a sign, and I've had a lot of discussions with, or I've been involved in a lot of discussions about physical signs because I sit on the membership development granting group where every once in a while we get a request for a sign, and we look at the wording and the word Quaker is missing. How are people supposed to know what's going on in that building? Or there's the term first day, come for first day. What the heck is that? Some signs are not updated. I'm looking at some new signs now where the meeting has put their website address or their email address. Certainly it's not something that was thought about even 5 or 10 years ago. And a lot of Quakers don't realize that they have a digital sign. They may not have set it up, but it's out there. Go out to Google Maps and look up your meeting, and it's out there, and there's probably a picture out there. There's might be something about the hours. There's often a phone number. Same with MapQuest. I did an experiment one time, and I went to a half a dozen, 6, 7, 8 Google Maps sites, and I called the phone numbers or emailed those addresses, and nobody ever answered. I never got a response. So whatever is out there, we ought to make sure that it's connected to somebody who's alive and responsive. What message does that convey to newcomers or curious people when you have a piece of contact information and then there's no linkage to anything? Website for sure, had a lot of discussion about that. It clearly has an impact. I can't tell you how many people ended up in our meeting because they saw us on the web. But how do you do it? Do you go for a basic one-pager? Do you use one of the template that's available from, I think it's FGC? Or are you ready for a custom website where you hire a developer and you invest in building out a website with all kinds of good information? And how much does it cost? And how much do you need to maintain it? These are all questions um, that require knowledge. And then once you decide you're going to do a website, there's a whole process, or there's a rigor behind it, if you will, a little bit of rigor. we had a program on digital presence as part of our series, and she said she gave a checklist, make sure you know what you're trying to accomplish with the website, have a call to action. She showed an example of a local large evangelical congregation that right smack in the front of their website is an invitation to plan your visit. Come and visit. We'll greet you. We'll show you what's going on here. And other aspects that she highlighted. And that program, Digital Presence, there's a deck for that, and there's a video. And if you want a copy of it, just let me know. So finally, what is the community's perception of us? Do they think about, once they find out there are Quakers in the area, are they perceived to be vibrant? Or are they thought of as being some kind of antiquated sect? Whoops, let me go back to my page here. That it's historic, but there aren't any, maybe some leftovers, but are they really a vibrant religious community? So do they even see us? Well, how can they see us? There's when we had the Newtown meeting speak about all the different activities they engaged in to make their meeting inviting and visible. There's somebody there that whenever they have an event that would be of interest to the public, they get it picked up in the local newspaper. Many meetings participate in community fairs. Many meetings are now part of interfaith groups. I know we are in our meeting. So we're having conversations with other local denominations. Whoops, something happened here. Oh boy. Wait a minute. Pressing the wrong button. And many meetings, and we heard about this morning as well, they open certain of their programs that would have broader interest. They publicize them to the local communities and open them to the public. I heard of one meeting that had movie night with discussion 4 or 5 times a year, and they always publicized it in the community, and that often brought in a lot of non-friends, and that was a way to not only make them visible, but they picked up some new attenders that way. So what would an office like this do in that regard, regarding our signage and our websites and how the community perceives us? Well, we could create a quick reference on how to create an effective sign, both digitally and physically. We could provide some guidance on how to go about thinking of approaching the website issue. Put together a quick reference on visibility, how to do it, different mechanisms to do that. What if PYM were periodically to put out a coordinated outreach ads and conferring with quarters or meetings on where to put that besides broad-based outlets like Philadelphia Inquirer? What if we were to put together a directory of all the different fairs or routine annual events that meetings have, jumble sales and book fairs and whatever? What if that was all publicized in a central place? And not only to attract non-friends, but to attract friends to come to other friends' events. Fourth point, how does it feel to be a newcomer at your meeting? Do you remember when you first came to your meeting, what it felt like? Anybody have any first recollections of that? I remember there was a one-woman outreach committee, I call her. She It was before there were outreach committees. We started coming to our meeting 30 years ago. And she spoke to me or my husband almost every Sunday we were there. So we could find our way around. She introduced us to other people. We had 2 preschoolers, and she helped us get connected to the first day school. We got them plugged in. The experience is not always like that for somebody. I spoke to someone the other day who said he went to the meeting he goes to now for many Sundays before anyone spoke to him other than to shake his hand. He was very lonely and didn't know how to plug in. So there are meetings that are starting to actually provide some specific training to a couple of people that want to be, I'll say, official greeters, if you will, but they kind of understand how to be a good listener and how to do this without overwhelming somebody. And the better meetings have what you might think of as an on-ramp, as one meeting called it, to progressively help a newcomer understand, answer questions and understand how to get connected to communications, that sort of thing. If you have potlucks, let them know about them ahead of time. And then to find mechanisms for small group connections. Could be an open coffee hour once a month. It could be something on Zoom. It could be an invitation to let newcomers hear from existing friends in the meeting how they got there and something about their spiritual journey. But small group initiatives where people can talk to each other. And it's so important for this welcome to come from multiple places in the meeting. It can't just be one committee's responsibility. If kids show up, it's important for the point person in the school religious ed to approach them and say, oh, do you want to know about what we're doing with the kids? Would you like to come down over and see what we're doing with the kids? If there's some kind of social event coming up that the hospitality committee or the equivalent is specifically inviting newcomers, not just assuming they're going to hear about it. So the welcome mat needs to be staffed by multiple different groups in the meeting. So what could a membership development office do to support that? Well, I'll tell you, there's a ready-made piece of information. Linda alluded to this morning. The FGC has a fabulous piece. They call it the Quaker Meetings Toolbox on Welcoming, and I highly recommend it. It's very detailed, more information you could ever use. There's even a kind of a snarky video on what if Starbucks were to adopt the church mode for getting new customers, and it's kind of funny. I mean, it's meant to be funny.
It's a slowdown on I-60.
Sorry? Did somebody say something about that?
No, it's okay, Irene. I think somebody's unmuted temporarily.
Oh,
Keep
okay.
going.
Okay. So that's right, available out there. But once you read this material, you invariably you're going to need some coaching. It's not enough to read. You're going to have questions. You're going to need a little help in figuring things out, or you're going to have situations that are a little unique, and that's where somebody in this office could help with coaching. The last item here is money. It has to do with money, and think about what's the biggest expense for your meeting apart from power and heat. I mean, we don't have ministers, so what are we spending our money on? Anybody here want to talk about that or give us some input on where your meeting is spending your money?
Irene, do you want to invite folks to put that in the chat? Would that be one way and you could read them?
Yeah. Well, I think that has changed. I would say that that has changed, and that today we're spending money on an internet subscription. We probably have invested in some audio equipment that we didn't have before, prompted by COVID, and maybe now we're keeping it, or we're going to probably keep our hybrid setup. And there's some amount of money that's retained for property costs to keep the place so it doesn't look shabby and it looks inviting. So what would this office do? It would certainly could provide some written guidance on all those, on setting up hybrids and technology options. When does it make sense to just put speakers in your meeting house as opposed to investing in an owl, for example? And could we pull together meetings that have similar service providers and come up with a group discount to save meetings some money? And there's grant money out there, and we could have a centralized place to know where to go to get that. Some within PYM, some outside of PYM. So in the end, there would be this function that would be providing information and taking in information on a whole array of topics that revolve around outreach and member integration. And we'd end up with a function with a subject matter expert that one could call on from their meeting, a thought leader for PYM on the topic, and someone who had a whole lot of resources on hand for meetings as they were ready for them. So this would be a persistent resource, not fragmented, not catch can. It would be ready for meetings as they were ready for it. And it would also connect meetings that feel isolated or limited because they don't have the resources to do this. They don't have the knowledge and they don't have the resources, which suggests that this would be a pillar on our strategic plan. And this really all boils down to that graph at the very beginning of this presentation. Will your meeting and will unprogrammed meetings be among those growing churches? Are we gonna be growing? So I'll step back at this point. I don't know if this idea makes sense or if it's not necessary because people are getting the support they need in other ways, or if you think it would, if there's something you think your meeting would, if this function exists, what would your meeting call upon this function to do for you or to help you with? Sue.
Could you go back about 3 slides to say what the membership development office would have in place? That's it. Thank you. And
Sue,
is there one right before that?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Is there one right before that or no?
Well, there's this
Membership,
one, which,
nope, ahead. That looks like a barcode. Subject matter expert, that's what I want. Thank you.
yes. Somebody else has their hand up. Joan.
Yes, I think it's a wonderful idea that the resources be centralized. My question is, as the clerk of a meeting, how do I start to move members in this direction? Like, I feel that we have no long-term strategy or long-term vision. And that's something that I want to address with our meeting. I just feel like we're scattered all over the place.
Mhm.
And so I
Well,
think, oh, go ahead.
yeah. Well, the first thought that occurs to me is to connect your meeting with a couple of meetings that have already done that. And I mean, for now, I could do that just because of the experience we had with this series that we did last year. I happen to know that London Grove is actively involved in this very process. I would also refer you to a couple of meetings that have a well-oiled program, and you could probably benefit from hearing from them how they got to that point.
Mhm.
So I think talking to individual meetings that have either been through the process or in the process could be helpful. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think what I also had in mind is having someone from PYM to help meetings conduct these threshing sessions.
Yes, absolutely.
And is there currently that sort of resource available?
Did you want to? I see your head nodding, Melinda.
Yeah, okay to jump in, Irene?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So there's a team of staff that are called the Community Engagement Team, and they include really kind of cradle to grave, which I don't mean to say that, silly, thinking across different stages of life, and different parts of what our work is in our local meetings and connecting each other with each other. So, Olivia Brangan is the Community Engagement Coordinator. Um, and there will be a new youth engagement coordinator because I've moved into the director of programs position. We have an inclusion and belonging coordinator, um, and our aging resources coordinator. So, and within inclusion and belonging, and also Kimani, who is here with us today, the two of them in their two roles also share care for the young adult friends community, which very actively has retreats and building community with each other. So we are people you can pick up the phone and call. Outreach is a thread, I would say, that runs through all of our work. It's something I feel like I think about all the time, and Irene knows that because we've worked together and collaborated um, on the series that Colin Quarter did as well. So just this week, and I said this in the chat, but, had a meeting reach out to me to say, we're holding a real concern about young families. Who might we talk to? And I pulled together a small group of 5 different meetings where I know things are that's a similar concern and some good things are happening. And they got together this week and had an amazing conversation that my next thought is, well, when we do the religious education and youth thread gathering this year, we should include a piece around this particular care for families. One of the things I said to them was, in the same way that we sometimes, you can talk about the idea of in planting corn and squash and beans working together. Really thinking about 3 friends working together. Those are the 3 sisters in Native American planting, thinking about 3 friends. So your RE committee on people who have care for children's programs, an outreach committee in the meeting, and care and counsel or worship and ministry, bringing down some of the silos between our committees in the local meetings, and working together in the way that Irene said. you know, when people come in the door, there's not just one committee who should be approaching them. It's really everybody thinking about that inclusion piece that she's lifting up. But yes, we are here to have those conversations, to come and visit and sit with you, to just do the listening of a threshing session about what your condition is. And it doesn't have to be staff. There are other folks who we know who serve in other ways on in leadership in the early meeting, who I'm thinking about the Ministry and Care Committee, where there are people who are skilled listeners and facilitators. Yeah, hope that's helpful.
Joan, I would add to that feedback. If you think back to one of the first slides that I put out there about this study that was done on growing congregations and what the trademarks were of those congregations, one of the elements, common elements, is they had a growth plan.
Mhm.
It wasn't just an idea list. It wasn't just, oh, we're not good at this, we're not good at that. They had a plan, a strategy.
Mhm.
And I think that's what you're asking me. How can you formulate? Are you asking me that? How can you formulate that?
Yes,
And I think some meetings have done that and had good results. It makes a difference when you have a framework before you start doing.
definitely.
Lynn, I see your hand up.
Yes. First, I wanted to say that I like this model of the membership development office that you've outlined. I think it would be useful as a central idea for where people can get ideas and the resources and help that we need. And one of the things I would say that our meeting needs more of is under the large umbrella of technology, more help with how to, and you've given us some answers already, both this morning and this afternoon too, but better use of Facebook. I think we need a different website than the FGC one, which has limitations. Things like that, even within our Zoom meetings, where our sounds, we have a sound system in the meeting, we have the Zoom connections, but the sound is not good. Most of us in the meeting don't have the technological background to know how to, for example, can we hook up another microphone in the back of the meeting that would pick up? So there are a lot of those sort of more technical things that I know our meeting needs more of. But again, I do like this model of coming to being able to access some experts in these matters.
You're bringing up such a good point, Lynn, because if you don't have someone who's an audiovisual or at least an audio specialist in your meeting,
Yeah.
It's like trial and error.
Yes.
And so many meetings are doing that individually and not necessarily making the right decisions or kind of bumbling along. Right? I think that's the point you're making.
That's certainly the point about the sound. Yes. And we have been bumbling along through COVID. And we have some success, but it could be a whole lot better. And many of us that use Zoom fairly frequently for meeting for worship find it difficult. It just doesn't totally work. So.
And on the digital world side, we learned a lot from Emily Provence when she did a Facebook for Friends training. I don't know if you happen to hear about that or would like a copy of that deck, but she taught us that you don't just jump in unless you're ready to keep this maintained. If you put a Facebook page up and you don't update it for a month at a time, you're doing yourself a disservice. You kind of look like, is anybody home, right?
Right.
Is this really a live organization? And then figuring out who's going to have permission to do that, what the guidelines are. I mean, it's not just get a site and you're ready to go. You have to think it through.
Right.
And she gave some very good guidelines on that, I thought.
Okay. Is that resource in our in those lists that have been on the chat?
So there are two ways right now to get this, and maybe I'll talk to Melinda later and get this posted on PYM. I think that would be great. But
Okay,
we have given the decks, all 6 of those decks, to South Jersey Quakers. They're going to put them up
Okay.
on their website.
okay,
You can get them from me, any of them from me. My email address is on the front of this deck, and hopefully we can get them posted at PYM.
great, thank you.
Some nice material on there. Let's see. I see Ken.
I think we have this really grandiose idea about meetings wanting to grow. And having been at this for a long time, and I have a good friend who used to get himself in trouble regularly with people from PYM when he would call them dead meetings. But there are a good number of meetings who just really, they're a family meeting. They don't care. The change scares them to death. And it's not that we shouldn't be giving resources to these people, but we should know enough about our meetings to know who needs the most resources and who can benefit from instead of taking this big wide PYM brush and sweeping, all these things. And I'm sorry, Melinda, but I have to disagree. We can call outreach a thread, but it's not outreach. The members of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting have been calling out for leadership to recognize the need since 1997 for PYM. And then again, the Priorities Process Committee, which some of us may have been on, who did the first regional visits of PYM to record what people, and spent 6 months putting that into 4 top priorities. The first one being making ourselves known and growing. And yet here we are having this conversation all these years later about making something a position to do what there always should have been a position to do. And on top of it, our meetings have floundered during the pandemic because there's nothing in PYM that could respond. Sitting in your office, we call you. No, did we see? Yes, Melinda, you went out to other meetings. How many other people did? Who went out and actually talked to the people in the meetings? What do they need? And it's all about resources. We don't have, Irene has dedicated years of ever since I've known her, to membership development. There's people who are rolling off the membership development support granting group have been doing it for 9 years, and we keep doing it except we have to leave. And it's just time. It's time to focus, to bring all of us together that are doing all this volunteer work so we don't have to do it all. Stop reorganizing the volunteers and find out what the quarters and the monthly meetings need. And we need support and growth because our growth is your growth. That's how it works. Our growth is your growth.
We have
yes.
What I think of as a federation, right? We have a federation.
Yes.
If I were to use the United States government as a model, there are certain things that are done in the federal level and resources there, and then execution and certain things that are done at the next level down, which for us, with our meetings. And good support from the top is what the theory here is, the premise here is. Melissa, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Irene. I am sitting here right now in my house that is literally physically vibrating because the mega church, one of the several mega churches in Muncie, has taken over my local park. And as part of their outreach effort, they have brought in a live band with an extraordinarily loud bass and a wailing woman who is singing about Jesus. And they have food trucks, and they've shut down the street, and they do this every Saturday in a different park in Muncie.
Wow, every Saturday.
Yep. So if you want to talk about outreach, that's one way to
Mhm.
do it. I don't know that
Mhm.
that particular method would feel very comfortable to friends, but as I'm physically experiencing it at the moment, I felt that I wanted to share it with you. And I realize, Irene, in your discussion that there are lots of different ways that different meetings and different quarters do this. And I just want to share that within Upper Susquehanna quarter, we've actually found that the pandemic has brought us far closer together, and we are doing more than we ever have.
Really? What's an example of that?
Sure. So we actually have been meeting for worship weekly throughout the pandemic as a quarter. We have been meeting as our Creative Hands gathering and camping more often. Creative Hands has been meeting once a month instead of just 3 or 4 times a year. We now have a ministry and care committee, which we formed during the pandemic, which we didn't have previously, which is actually active and engaged and functioning. We're doing Quakerism 101 for the entire quarter right now. We're in the middle of that. And so we've been able to take those grant funds and actually, instead of putting the burden on small meetings to figure out how to do big programming like that, we're doing it at the quarter level.
Mhm.
So everyone from all of the monthly meetings is invited.
Mhm.
And it's actually been a really wonderful way for people to discover folks outside of their quarterly meeting. And then we also recently approved at-large membership in the quarter. And so as our smaller meetings are really struggling with if it makes sense to have a meeting of 3 people when everyone has to drive 25 minutes to get there, or does it make more sense to actually be members in the quarter? So we're actually doing well.
Interesting.
Although the pandemic is in no way a good thing, it has been something that we've been able to take advantage of. And as you're talking about all of these things, I'm realizing that one of the things that would be a really good first step would be to actually form a collaborative. Collaboratives are gatherings of Quakers who care about an issue. And there really isn't a collaborative right now that's focused on things like communication and outreach. And it's actually probably a really good match for that particular structure within PYM. It's the description says, unite individuals across the yearly meeting into a dynamic community organized yearly meeting where collaboratives group ideas, friends with similar ideas and interests.
Well, let me pose a question to you, because that idea has been proposed to me as well, Melissa, and I have to say that I rejected it, but maybe I'm not thinking about it right. A collaborative is volunteers. And it seems to me that this need is so important, so fundamental to the survival of our organization that it needs to be funded. Am I off base on that?
As someone who comes from a quarter, I actually was really intrigued this morning to attend and hear from paid staff in quarters. USQ has none. And the things that we discussed, we've done on our own. And so I actually think that volunteers are a powerful force. And I think that many of us have very good ideas. I really loved hearing what quarters are doing.
Mhm.
And I think that a quarter in and of itself is a really strong organizational unit,
Mhm.
and one that I think I'm fully in favor of. But I also think that collaboratives are a way of knitting folks together across the yearly meeting who share expertise. I actually think that throughout the body in Philadelphia yearly meeting, there are friends who know a lot.
That's
And
right.
a very good way of connecting them to each other and getting them engaged and helping them to promote and share their ideas would be to form a collaborative.
Let me go across here and see if anybody else has their hand up here. I think I caught everybody. Did I miss anybody? I don't think I see any more hands up. Oh, Ken, is your hand up?
Yeah, Irene, I just want to, and I'm not trying to be Donnie Downer here. There has been a collaborative since 1997 that has been doing the work of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, and has been called the Membership Development Fund, and the granting group that has been trying to have an arm of an organization that they could even work with to use and disperse the money. And the idea of a collaborative was thumbed down by PYM 3 years ago, or the person responsible, and that's fine. But that same group of people and other people that were at the thread gathering have moved beyond a collaborative. Yes, we should form a collaborative. That's great. But who's going to get the collaborative up and started? Who's going to connect the people that have the weaknesses and strengths? Who's going to do all this? The only way is it needs to be a funded resource. And it's not that things haven't been done. They've been done over and over again for a long time. Thank you.
Gwen, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. And this is kind of a question, kind of an observation, but I'd love your input. In our meeting, like a lot of meetings, the average age of members is pretty old.
Mhm.
And we want younger families. And we're starting to hear little glimmers that are making me realize how much we don't see the world the way younger families do. And three of the things that come to mind, and the digital presence that's been talked about today is so crucial. I mean, one thing we've even thought is that younger families should maybe have a little chat group to know who's going to come to first day school, because they don't want to come unless someone else is there.
Mhm.
But the other things are sort of reality of the world has changed. And one thing is organized sports, which is a problem for all churches, that the kids
Organized
have
what?
organized sports. The kids have soccer games
Sports.
on Sunday.
I know, it's shameful that they have games on Sunday morning. Every church must go crazy over that.
Right. But that's the reality that they live in. And how do we
Mhm.
work with what is real as opposed to
Yeah.
what we like?
Yeah.
And the third thing is meeting for business. If you're a retired person, you don't maybe mind sitting through the endless discussion, but younger families can't and won't. Are there any meetings that are finding ways to just find little ways to make that a little more efficient? Or, I mean, we don't want to lose the listening aspect of the Quaker process. We don't want to start voting on things. But at the same time, does every committee report have to be like this endless, I don't know.
Well, I'll
But-
tell you, in our meeting a couple years ago, we dropped we don't read reports anymore. They're distributed by email in advance, and then the person that wrote the report, the committee that wrote the report, will come before the committee to make 1 or 2 points and answer questions. We're not reading that. We're not reading minutes anymore. I mean, that's not necessary anymore. You could easily go digital with that, for
Yeah.
example.
I think
And I think what you're saying is we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. We're discouraging people from participating in yearly meeting or a business meeting because we're doing it the way it was done in the 1800s.
Well, yes, and there are some things that will be lost, but it would be great to make it tolerable for a wider group.
Yeah, or more efficient because people are juggling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
very
I
good
guess
point.
I'm just throwing out this growing sense I have that the way our meeting sees the world is probably not the way younger people are seeing it. And how do we get in so that we work with the reality of how it is?
Let's see, I see 2 more hands. I see Joan and then I see Melinda. How about if I take you in that order?
Yes, in talking to your point, I try to establish a consent agenda for our meetings for business, and it got such pushback.
A what agenda? Sorry?
Like a consent agenda, which meant that things would be sent out. And if people had questions or concerns, they could contact that committee clerk and discuss it so that there didn't need to be, again, these endless conversations. And that if everyone was in agreement with it, we could just go to the meeting and say, yes, we find unity behind this. Again, I just got a tremendous amount of pushback, especially by the older members, that I was not following correct Quaker process, that we needed to sit with these things in a group. And I think I made the mistake of calling it a consent agenda. And I think I really need to go back and look at the phrasing of this to make it more acceptable to people. So again, I mean, I need some guidance in, how do you take these steps and bring people?
It kind of goes back to the point that Gwen made and a couple of others. It's important for everybody in the meeting to be open to considering change.
Mhm.
Just because it used to be done a certain way doesn't mean it's a bad idea. There's good reasons why things were done sometimes, but sometimes it ought to be re-examined, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Let's see, Melinda and then Agnes.
Yeah, I just want to speak to what Gwen was raising in the outreach presentation that I do for meetings, the part that's about signs, which I so appreciate Irene talking about today, also has schedules as another thing. And it's, again, change is hard. It's not easy. But if we're talking about being committed to growing, we need to be willing to sit in that discomfort sometimes in the way that you're describing, Joan, in terms of the pushback you received. And I've gathered things from different meetings that are interesting things that they have done. Medford meeting for a period of time had a Wednesday evening where from 6 to 7 they had pizza and then meeting for worship, and it was for families. And so you didn't have to think about dinner that night. Everyone got fed, and recognizing that Sunday morning is a time that has all kinds of other demands on it right now for families,
Interesting.
for better or for worse. The idea of having fellowship before meeting so that there is sort of a buffer and there's some kind of donuts or something that a family can say, breakfast will be there when we get there, put on your shoes and get in the car, as a help to young families to get to meeting, and a way to have fellowship with each other and know each other a little bit. I think about that newcomer who comes in the back of the room, doesn't know anyone, and comes into a silent meeting room. What if someone had spoken to them and said hello and had a conversation before they went into worship? And we tried at Westchester meeting, and I come to these conversations, friends, myself as a member of a local meeting. It says staff next to my name, but I'm here among you as a friend who's carrying these concerns in my own meeting. We tried an experiment of having meeting for business, Gwen, thinking about your question, earlier, before worship. And so at 8:30, there was something very light food-wise. Our babysitter was there. We had childcare during the meeting for business time. And we tried having meeting for business from 9 to 10:15, and then creating a short break, a buffer before worship at 10:30. It doubled the number of people who attended meeting for business, and the people who were in that second, third, 35 to 59-ish generational group were there. The ones who have children whose voices have been missing. There were other folks who didn't like that model, and it felt discomforting to go into worship, having been talking about some of the business. And then the pandemic started and our experiment ended. But the bigger point being to think about where flexibility with schedules is what is going to make space and open that door for families, for the reasons that Gwen said.
I saw you vigorously shaking your head when I talked about making sure there was childcare when there was a business meeting, or other events that involve, discussions. Very, very important. It's just another thing that a young family doesn't have to worry about. Agnes, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on meeting for business. We actually have made our meeting for business a lot more efficient and shorter. And we have fun when we have meeting for business. And it's been a gradual process over a little more than a year that we've been working toward this. We've got an agenda now that consists of announcements that generally are not discussed. It's so everyone's aware of what's happened from last month. We have two portions of old business that we'll discuss, and old business that's there only as placeholders so we don't forget about it, because our meeting had a habit in the past of we'd say, why don't we do X? And then we wouldn't reach a decision and it would never come up again. It would just get dropped. And a lot of good ideas fell by the wayside.
Mm.
So now they're all in the B category of old business. And if somebody feels moved to say, this one's been in the B category for a while, why don't we elevate it and talk about it? Then we do talk about it. And then the new business is the final part of it. And another thing we've done is we've actually gradually gone back to having committees. And our committees don't write formal reports. They're mainly ad hoc committees. So we decided it was time to update our cemetery policy. So we formed a committee and we updated it. We sent it out for review. And then we brought it up at a meeting for business after everybody had had time to review it. And the group quickly said, yes, we will adopt that with almost no discussion. When I talked about getting rid of our shed, when we decided to get a new shed a couple of years ago, we talked and talked and talked, meeting after meeting for hours, and never picked a shed. And we kept saying, well, why don't we shop here? Why don't we shop there? We never bought a shed. Now
You
we
didn't buy a shed. Oh my God.
Well, now we said, Sherry, you're our shed committee, because she lives near a company that sells sheds. And we said, everybody, you have all the shed prices and designs from a couple of years ago. Let's see what Sherry comes back with.
Yeah.
And in about
Delegate.
10 minutes of discussion, she was a one-person shed committee. She shopped, she brought back pictures, she put them up on the screen. And we said yes in a matter of minutes.
Got it done. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've, our meeting for business is never over an hour anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And we cover far more topics. I've been to training on meeting for business, and you're supposed to only have 3 topics if you want to do them justice. And we can do far more than that and do them justice. And we enjoy discussing it with each other. There's no conflict. And it's working very well to have this change in our approach.
Interesting. Anybody else? I want to pick up on a comment that was made this morning because it's come up a couple of times in our meetings. Charles Hardy talked about the outreach at public events is vital. He used the word vital. And so often I hear the comment, well, you never get any new attenders by showing up at a fair or by, going to representing your meeting at some local event or in some kind of, joint venture with a couple of other churches. And he made the point that, I made the point that it shows that we're alive and well, that we're a vibrant entity in the community. But he made the point that if you make an effort to connect with your neighbors, you start to build relationships. And that's just as important as bringing in new members and attenders. It was such a good point that he made. And it made me think about something that our meeting is involved in. We're involved in an interfaith group. And one year, a couple of years ago, this is just before the pandemic, the topic was sacred scriptures. And so every month, one of the denominations would hold a forum or a workshop, a meeting where you could come and hear about how they use sacred scriptures in their service and in their practice. Well, we don't exactly do that. I mean, the Bible is certainly an important part of Quakerism, but we're not reading it every Sunday in service and all that, and we don't really have a service that way. But we do have a very active, friendly Bible study program in our meeting. I don't know how many of you have ever done that, but it's a worship sharing. It's absolutely fascinating. I learn something. I get some new insight that often totally surprises me at the end of every one of those. But in any event, we said, well, let's show them how we do worship. We'll show them how we do Bible study. So we did, and there were about 45 people. And in my group that I was leading, I had a rabbi, a Presbyterian, a couple of Lutherans, and I think somebody from the Church of Christ or whatever. I mean, a whole variety of people. But we could do a Bible study. I gave them a passage. This one I picked from the, I don't know if I picked it from the, anyway, I picked a passage. And it's 5 generic questions, like, what does it mean? Is there new light? Blah, blah, blah. And we had the greatest discussion, all of us from different backgrounds, different perspectives. And several of them came up to me and others later and said, gee, we're going to try this in our church. Now, what a great, another form of outreach, just in terms of building some relationships with other churches. Now, maybe somebody will be sparked to want to come to a meeting after that. Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. But that is a worthwhile effort. And that's going to have that reverberated throughout, beyond our community. So I thought Charles's point about being present and visible in the community is ever so important. Hi, Linda, you're putting your hand up. You're on mute.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to PYM and see if Melinda would be willing to spend a few minutes telling us what areas or what aspects of outreach and membership development support that are already available from PYM staff, or if there's any ideas that staff are thinking about that they might add. I had planned to preface this by saying a number of people here in our quarter have said that they no longer know what any staff does, that you have a name and a title, but the title really doesn't mean anything. And so they just don't bother calling PYM because they don't know who to call. And so I guess I want to end by offering a suggestion that we need some kind of directory or some kind of index that would at least say, if you're calling about this or that, or you want to contact someone, who do you go to? But Melinda, could you say a few things? I mean, I'm familiar with spiritual formation and other kinds of activities. So what existing resources are there that people should know about?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Well, I'll start by saying that we're thinking alike. We actually are going to create a place on the website that explains the community engagement team in particular. What does it mean that Olivia Brangan is a community engagement coordinator? What do you go to Olivia for? What our different roles mean. So we've been gathering that and hope to get that put up. There is a page which was new to me when I found it. I'll see if I can find it and put it in the chat. That does say, if you need such and such, here's who to contact. If you need, it was a little more nuts and bolts, but it does exist on the website. And I'll go find that. But I think that's different than what you're asking. And the thing you're asking is something we're in process with. I'm glad to be able to share. There is a section in the resources section of the website. There is a section, it's organized by threads. There is one for outreach and communications. A lot of things could be added there. There should be, if there isn't already, the slideshow and some of the things we've seen and heard today might be on there, but there is a section on there. It could be more fulsome, but it has a section on virtual gathering, which, many of us are still a part of that. And we've heard today the power of doing things by Zoom to be able to gather, welcoming families and other resources. So I think that could be augmented in that way. When I'm going through your question in my mind, Some people are in, some positions are pretty new. I mean, Afroza Hossein is our inclusion and belonging coordinator. She has a particular concern around both young adults and also when we talk about what does inclusion and belonging mean, inclusive anti-racism work, um, those kinds of pieces. And so, she is a resource. I hold particular, you can already tell, I know, care for families and children and young people and inclusion with them. And again, there are lots of resources. There's some more things actually on the religious education section of that resources page that have some things about families and young people and that kind of outreach. And I think that there's sort of a bigger piece here, which is I think part of our work is to release the gifts that exist in the yearly meeting. There was comment earlier that there are many people who have great ideas. I mean, apropos of what we've heard today, that finding ways to share those is part of what happens. Earlier in talking about putting publicizing adult education speakers, the PYM website, when something like that is happening at your meeting, I actually want to give Morristown meeting a shout out. They frequently have really interesting programs, and they go and put them on the website. They are there. But if you're doing a program and want to widen the welcome, you can fill out the form to have it put on the calendar, but then also reach out to a staff person, anyone on the community engagement team to say, we'd like this to be in the news and events email this week so it gets bumped up in front of people a little bit more. I love the idea of having like an annual thread gathering around newcomers and outreach. Our inclusion, feels like something that is really doable and possible. We started thinking a couple years ago across some of these threads that they didn't need to be siloed, the thread gatherings, that there's an intersection between a number of them as well. And just the reaching out to your neighbors and connecting beyond the walls of your meeting house is a topic that we've been that'll be a conversation that Sessions Coordinating Committee will have about future sessions and as a theme. There's been energy rising around that idea of how are we neighbors beyond ourselves, which there's been so much today said about that. So a little bit of what exists, I'm probably missing things too, Linda, and also some of those possibilities that we've touched on in the conversation today.
Is there anybody else that has a question? Oh, hi, Sue. Go ahead.
The problem with all of that, all of the resources, is that they're scattered all over the place. And it's not an easy website, PYM website, even if you know what you're looking for, to be able to find them. They're embedded under embedded under embedded. And what I'm hearing in this proposal is not only that those things would be gathered in a spot on the website, easily identified, but also that there would be a person you could then contact to say, okay, this is the problem we're having. Which of these many things are the ones that would be useful for us? Our PYM website is just all over the place. Things that I thought I knew where they were have suddenly dwarfed into something else under something else under something else. And if you're a small meeting, if you're a meeting who is not highly computer literate, if you're a frustrated person, the PYM, the resources aren't going to be utilized because they can't be found easily. And I think easily is the operative word that needs to be really, really looked at.
I'd like to ask another question, if I may, to the group, opinion question, and it's very sensitive. So it's a question, it's not a recommendation. But Ken kind of alluded to this earlier, and it comes up every once in a while in conversations about growing meetings and all that. But scattered throughout PYM are some number of meetings that are very tiny, and unlike Agnes's meeting, there's no energy to revive them. Agnes, I think, I love hearing Agnes's story. She spoke in our series as well, and I learned so much, and I got such inspiration from what they were cooking up. But there are plenty of little meetings that are down to a few family members or a few friends. And unlike the two meetings we heard about today, there's no interest or energy to revive them. Does that get addressed by the quarter or by PYM? It seems the logical thing to do, and may not be the emotionally right decision, is to for those people to take them to another local meeting and to close the building down and to sell it. Am I thinking about that right? Because otherwise it's kind of diverting people from focusing on where they could maybe get the best return and do the best for the community. Does anybody know? I mean, we say we have 100 and some odd meetings, but a lot of, there's a bunch of them that are sort of just hanging on by their fingernails and drifting away. Oh, Melissa, are you answering that?
I can. I see Jean Marie has her hand up as well.
Oh,
And
go
I
ahead.
don't know that she's had a chance to speak yet.
Okay. The Barch person.
Couple of things, and then I know that Melissa may also have some of these things in her toolkit to share. But certainly there are a couple of meetings who have said, we are too small to be viable, either because we don't want to be or because we just aren't. And so they have quietly faded away by attrition. One meeting that I know of got rid of its meeting house and is renting space. And suddenly they're starting to grow again because they're not under the weight of having property concerns and all of the other things that they can really focus on one another and on their faith journey together. And that's been very salutary for them.
Oh, interesting.
I think that there are some meetings who are tiny, struggling, and want to do something about that. And those meetings have actually done at least a little teeny step in terms of trying to do something about that by saying so in their spiritual state of the meeting report. Until relatively recently, when people were feeling that kind of pressure, they just kept quiet about it because it felt somehow shameful that their meeting wasn't thriving and they didn't want anybody to know. Well, now people are saying, gee, maybe we could use some help. And we're in a position, and Ministry of Care is really looking at how do we begin to put together meetings who are expressing these concerns with meetings who are really doing well in that area and who are growing and who do have a sense of how to do this connection outreach. So I think there are, it's different strokes for different folks. There are different meetings with different sets of needs. And what has felt really important to me recently is that we're getting to actually talk with one another about this stuff instead of hiding it, instead of pretending that everything is just fine. Thank you very much. I know that there are meetings in Upper Sus who have been beginning to band together, and I should let Melissa talk about them because they're her meetings, but I heard her enthusiasm about the ways in which these little meetings have been able to reach out to each other and lean on each other a little bit and begin to learn from each other in that way. So I think
get inspiration from each other too.
Inspiration, comfort, all of those things are beginning to be more available. So I think that there is some movement in this, and I think it's really, really very fruitful. I think it also is part of the web that we can constructively weave together to use the expertise that Melinda was talking about before, to use the knowledge and real attempts at innovative work that are available to us from one another if we will simply be open to allowing one another to do it. And to
And
ask,
even before that, to even know about it, right? There's
to
such
say that it's okay
such
to
a
ask.
body of experience and knowledge across our meetings.
Yep.
It's just, it's just wonderful. Like, I'll use that adjective, wonderful. Yeah,
It's true, it is.
yeah, great point.
If I could, Irene,
Yes.
to answer your really specific questions, quarters do have a care relationship for the meetings that are in the quarter.
Mm-hmm.
The monthly meetings matter to the quarter, and hopefully the quarter matters to the monthly meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully there's a relationship there, and folks know each other and are aware. And so sometimes a meeting will send up a flare and say, hey, things are rough here. And sometimes they won't. And sometimes they'll just be off in the corner somewhere thinking we are all alone and there is no help and nobody knows and no one cares. But the first actual line of engagement should be the quarter. To know what's happening, to be engaged with the folks who are there, to be practicing intervisitation. And intervisitation, I will say, is not an accident, it's intentional.
Yeah.
It's something that we really need to think about and say, who in the quarter is visiting the small meetings and when are we doing it? How frequently are we doing it? It's not just it looks like a good day to go visit someone. Have a plan, have a structure. When are you going? I pre-pandemic, this was something that I did almost every time I could get away with it. I was visiting someone. And what I found was that small meetings were desperate for news. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know what was happening in the next meeting over, or in the quarter, or the yearly meeting, or is there something bigger than the yearly meeting? They didn't know that either. And so I hope that at the quarter level, you're actually engaged in a very deliberate and intentional way in doing this. I will also say that, Jean Marie is right. Small meetings may have very different approaches. The one I mentioned earlier, where the members are very few and very geographically dispersed, have a really hard time saying, why would I drive 25 miles to sit in a room with 3 people, the same 3 people every single Sunday? That's a hard sell. And on the other hand, there's another.
And so what's the answer? How do they answer that?
In their case, they were also renting space to make it possible for them to meet together. And they are actually joining the quarter worship. So they're worshiping via Zoom with everyone in the quarter every Sunday.
Okay.
There's another meeting with 3 members. And one of the ways that the quarter helps support them is that periodically we all pick up and we go visit them. So they may have a single Sunday bump where they go from the 3 to 25. And we all sign their guest book. And it's a wonderful opportunity to say, you matter to us. We are willing to get in our cars and drive 125 miles on a Sunday to worship with you. And that's within my quarter. Just to be clear, from corner to corner, it's 200 miles in Upper Sus. So intervisitation is not an accident. You got to have enough gas in your car to do it. But I think that if those small meetings and the people in them matter, that the quarter should be thinking about how it can engage with them, support with them, and make it possible for them to move forward in whatever way works best for them.
So the role of the quarter becomes very important for the small meetings, which is what we saw this morning with the 2 small meetings who are getting such support from the South Jersey Quakers. A very, very interesting point.
And no staff, just to be clear, we have no paid staff. This is just all volunteers.
Yeah. Wow. Anybody, we're getting near, we're not quite at 3, but we're almost there. Does anybody else have a final question or comment before we wind down? Well, all right. It was very good to talk with all of you and get your feedback. Sue, were you raising your hand? No, or just stretching? Okay.
Linda has her hand up.
Oh, Linda. Oh, go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, sorry, I know you're trying to close. There's another wonderful resource available from PYM. and that's Linnell. 3 or 4 years ago, we had 3 really quite small, fairly endangered meetings. And someone suggested we have someone come talk about what do you do if you're thinking about laying down the meeting? What are your options? And she gave a very, very helpful series of options and talked about different experiences of other meetings. And while
She's a
talking about,
finance officer, Linda? Is that-
yes,
Yeah.
yes, Linnell McCurry. It was a difficult conversation in some ways because no one wants to lay down a meeting. But on the other hand, you had a sense of hope that there were ways that the meeting house could be passed on to someone else and used. For example, one meeting, I think in Burlington, has become a mosque or an Islamic community center affiliated with a mosque. And some other places have turned into parks and so on. So when you get, what's important is when you get small, before you get too small, it might be good for meetings to have a conversation and decide if we get to the point that there's only 2 members and we can't keep it going, what is the agreement amongst friends at this point that, you know, the following steps should be taken. Anyway, she was very, very helpful to us, and it gave us the chance also to invite people from nearby quarters so that we could help share that information.
Mhm. Very good. Well, all right. So I will be emailing the slide deck to Kimani and Melinda, so it can be distributed to everybody who registered. And I would invite you, once you've kind of thought about this presentation, as well as if you want to look over the deck again, I would very much appreciate it if you would email me back and let me know if this idea makes sense to you or makes sense in a modified way or it really isn't necessary. I would like to get some email feedback from as many of you as possible. We've gotten some good feedback on the phone, but sometimes you need to kind of digest something before you come to a conclusion. So that I would appreciate that. Until the next time, we'll sign off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Irene, thank you, Irene.